Hey guys at Wrestling Inc. This is Scott Fishman here. So I got a couple days ago, I got a chance to visit Tampa and the museum there. I know that they have at the Tampa Bay History Center. There was a wrestling exhibit that was actually supposed to launch during WrestleMania time this year, but that things got all on flux. But they still have the exhibit, and it's still a great way to revisit a lot of wrestling history. So I thought, what better way to kind of talk about it than talk to the curator himself, Dr. Brad Massey from the Saunders Foundation, the curator of public history at the Tampa Bay History Center. So thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it, Dr. Massey.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So tell me how the idea for this exhibit first came about. I mean, I know WrestleMania was coming to town, but who had the initial idea?
Yeah, WrestleMania was coming to town, and for those that aren't familiar with Tampa or the History Center, the Amalie Arena is literally right across the street from us.
Yeah, very
so it's where the Lightning play, and so we got together as a group, as we always do. We plan out our exhibits, especially the ones that are going to be in our temporary exhibit space. And we brainstormed the idea, and we said, well, we should really do a wrestling exhibit. I mean, Tampa Bay has been a hotspot for wrestlers. A bunch of wrestlers have lived here. Back in the territorial days, it was a really important location on the circuit. So we said, let's do a wrestling exhibit. We're going to have wrestling fans in the area, and that's how it came about.
So, it's called Sunshine State Showdown, and a lot of focus is on Tampa. But, with that, it also talks about the evolution with television, even the top stars like Mildred Burke of the time for women. Talk about what it was like to kind of put this together, and also to get WWE to kind of loan from their archives a lot of the items that that you see in the exhibit. Because a lot of times, they're very picky when it comes to participation with certain things like that. So how hard was it also to get them involved and on board?
Yeah, so I'll answer your first question is we sat around and we thought, well, we're going to do this wrestling exhibit about wrestling here in Florida, but where do we want to pick it up? Or do we just want to pick it up in the 60s and 70s with the territorial era? And what we decided is, well, let's go back. And so we start with actually wrestling's ancient roots. And we talk about how back in ancient times, there's wrestling, in Roman culture and Greek culture. And then we brought it up to the television era. And as you point out, we talk about Mildred and some of the other early wrestlers. And then we said, we'll do the early stuff, but then the focus will really be on the post-World War II period, because that's when Florida booms. Florida has a tiny population. It's the smallest of all the southern states on the eve of Pearl Harbor. But after World War II, millions of people moved down to Florida. So we say, well, that's what we'll focus on. And so then we said, well, let's reach out to the people at the WWE, and hopefully they'll be willing to partner with us. And it turned out they were. They have their own archivist on staff. His name's Ben. He's a great guy. Our marketing team reached out to the WWE. They obviously wanted to know what we were doing, what stories that we wanted. They wanted to know what stories we were going to tell, and we told them. And they were like, yeah, we can absolutely loan you stuff. So they loaned us a belt from the territorial period. They loaned us Brutus the Beefcake's shears. So we have those on permanent display currently while the exhibit is running. So it was really nice that they were open to us doing the exhibit, and they were willing to partner with us and loan us artifacts for the show.
I mean, for me, I had to take a photo in front of the NWA championship. It was just so cool to see. So many greats have held that championship. Did you have a say in what items that they were going to loan you? Like, did you have like a wish list, or how did they decide?
Yeah, basically that's what happened. Is I reached out to Ben and I said, anything that you'd be willing to loan us from the WWE archive, any artifacts would be great. And he said, well, you got to be more specific. He said, we have a ton of stuff. And I said, well, we're looking for wrestlers that have ties to Tampa. So people like the Macho Man Randy Savage, who played minor league baseball here in Tampa. People like China, who of course went to the University of Tampa. And so he goes, okay, well, be more specific. I said, okay, well, these are the people I want to feature. Do you have stuff from them? And so he had the shears from Brutus the Barber Beefcake. So he loaned those to us. The belt you were talking about is great because we profile a lot of different wrestlers. So if you come to the exhibit, you'll see Ric Flair. He's on our roll of Trash Talk. And so Flair held that belt. And then the belt's really cool because Von Erich held the belt for a while. And if you look really closely, the archivist Ben showed me this. He goes, you can see where he carved his name into the belt. His initials are right there on the belt.
Wow.
So yeah, basically I narrowed it down for Ben. I gave him a short list, and then he sent us stuff. but he was really great too. One thing we wanted to do is we wanted to build a ring. And he said, well, I can send you official WWE turnbuckles. I can send you the mat. So anyone that visits, you see a portion of a ring right when you come
Yeah,
into
right at the entrance. It's a very cool photo op.
Yeah, it's cool. It's got Sunshine State Showdown on there, but people should know those turnbuckles, those ropes, the blue mat, that's all loaned to us from the WWE. So that's
Very
their
cool.
official equipment. So yeah, long story short, I think the short answer to your question is, we gave Ben a list. He said, I'll help you find what I can, and he definitely did. And so he helped us round out the exhibit.
Yeah, it was cool with when you talk about the belt, just the detail. Your people would think, oh, why didn't they, um, rejuvenate it, or lack of for a better word, but it's just, I think it's great the way it is because there's so
Yeah.
much history there. You can like look at all the imperfections and look about what the history, and there's a story to tell with each of them. So that was very cool to see. One thing I did find interesting, though, aside from the WWE list, you included ODB, which I thought was interesting. What was the reasoning behind including her as well? On the big board there.
Yeah, so I really wanted to incorporate as many different wrestlers as we could. And, we wanted all types of wrestlers. We wanted well-known wrestlers like Ric Flair. We wanted people that were a little bit more obscure. Ben did tell me that ODB had a very short stint with the WWE, but she wrestled in other venues. And we didn't want to be exclusionary. We said, these small venues are really important. And wrestlers that maybe didn't make the huge impact that a Ric Flair or a Hulk Hogan did, we want to focus on them as well. And then we wanted a really wide pool. And part of ODB is that we really wanted to focus on women wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go through the exhibit, you'll see women. You had mentioned Burke earlier. We have Burke, we have ODB, Natalia is featured. So we wanted to feature different wrestlers, men, women, African-American wrestlers. And so that's one of the reasons that we picked ODB. And also, I just have a thing for ODB. I think she's cool. I like the persona. And so when I was doing research for the exhibit, I didn't know that much about wrestling in the last decade. And when I was researching her, I just found her really interesting, and she has ties to Florida. So
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love the vintage posters too, like with Judy Grable and so many others from back then, and programs. Is there kind of one piece that that you were excited to get, or that is one of your kind of favorites? I mean, aside from the championship, of course, but is there one that sticks out to you?
Yeah, the belt's really cool because it's got the initials in it. It also has a dent in it. Ben told me who got hit in the head with the belt to put the dent in it, but I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think I really liked Brutus's shears. When I watched wrestling a lot when I was younger, it was in that period in the late 80s and early 1990s. So that piece really resonated with me. I remember him using that, which is now, 30 years ago. So I really like the shears. The other thing, it's actually not sort of a three-dimensional artifact, but the WWE helped us piece together our trash talk reel. And if you come in, you'll see Bobby the Brain, you see Ric Flair, you see The Rock and other Florida wrestlers or people in the wrestling industry that had ties to Florida. And they helped us piece that together. And that's a really nice piece of work right there, because you see trash talk from these different people, and it's straight from the archives of the WWE. So those are my two favorite contributions of the exhibit that the WWE helped us with.
How mad was Titus O'Neil that he wasn't included in your in your wall?
That's so funny. I got to Titus when I went from back, or I should say the past, to forward. And I was thought to myself, well, when do I stop, right? Hulk Hogan is obviously historical at this moment, but I felt like, well, Titus is still, he's going to wrestle at WrestleMania. He's still getting pushes and things like that. So I had actually written text for him. And then at the last second, I was like, well, no, I'm going to take him out. But the good news about Titus was actually the weekend that the exhibit debuted, he kindly agreed to show up.
Yeah.
So he came, he climbed into the ring that we made. I purposely didn't come to the History Center that day because I didn't want him to ask me why he wasn't featured.
Yeah, I could see him being pretty mad.
Right. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna let them take care of that. They can talk to Titus. But yeah, but I guess the serious answer to your question is I felt like if they're still in the pinnacle of their career, if they're still wrestling and they haven't made that full transition to the movies like so many of them do, or, you know, their legacy hasn't sort of overshadowed their current wrestling. That was kind of where I drew the line. And I felt like Titus was still so current, and he was still in the middle of his career. So I decided he wasn't going to get in the exhibit.
Have you seen a lot of wrestlers come through the exhibit and kind of check it out through this time? Is there anyone couple that stick out to you? Or I know you mentioned Titus, I know Natalia was there, but are there any others that you can think of?
The ones that are interesting to me was there was nobody famous, but, these working class, for lack of a better term, wrestlers, people that are still going to wrestling school, people that, we talk about wrestling vocabulary a little bit in the exhibit. And I'm not using this word dismissively, but jobbers, right? People that go out there, they wrestle, they get a paycheck, but they're not Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had some of those people come in, and it's really interesting to get their take. Two of them came in, I forget their names. This was a while ago before COVID. The exhibit opened just before COVID. And they were walking around with one of the docents, one of our volunteers here at the exhibit. So yeah, seeing some of those people come to the exhibit and come to the History Center has been a cool experience.
So the exhibit, which is great that you guys have extended its stay through January the 10th of next year. Are there any plans to change it up a little bit, add on some things? And then also, there's a lot of talk about WrestleMania potentially going back to Tampa next year, of extending it further than that. So are there any further plans for this exhibit?
No, unfortunately not. When we had first designed the exhibit and we were working with the WWE, one thing they told us is that, well, we can bring stuff during the run, so we could rotate in new things. But as you can imagine, COVID really scuttled those plans. It's very difficult to coordinate new exhibit items. So we're going to stick with the exhibit as it is now, but hopefully, if WrestleMania does come back to Tampa, the History Center might be able to be involved in a pop-up exhibit where we did something smaller. And so I'd really like to do that. And we were talking to Ben about that because he does that at the different wrestling events. And we could certainly do something like that if WrestleMania was rescheduled to come back to Tampa. So yeah, hopefully we can do something small, but this, we have to schedule our exhibits pretty far out, and this exhibit has to rotate out, and we'll bring a new one in. But yeah, maybe in a different space on a smaller scale, we'll be able to do something.
All right. So you've worked on so many exhibits over the years. How does this how much fun did you have putting it together? What did you take from this experience? Did it bring out, memories of when you were a kid? Just talk about that.
Well, yeah, so I'll just tell you a story for that last part. My colleagues were laughing at me because they would walk by my door and all they would hear is wrestling trash talk for 3 months. I would watch wrestling trash talk. I would watch signature moves. And, it was a lot of fun. And it did take me back because I had to decide, well, do I like this trash talk? Am I focusing too much on the 80s? Because that's kind of like, in my heart, that's when I think about wrestling. I think about the late 80s and early 90s. So yes, it made me nostalgic in that regard. One of the funnest things about the exhibit for me is watching people experience it. So this is obviously a museum, and museums have a reputation for being a little stuffy, which is somewhat earned, right? But we try to keep things light and entertaining. But this is the first exhibit where I'll watch people come in and they laugh out loud and they point up at the walls and they're like, oh, I remember that. And one part of the exhibit that we had before COVID made us change it was we have a trash can out in the exhibit and we tell people to write down their trash talk and throw it in the trash can.
Yeah.
And so before we took the pencils away and stuff because nobody wanted to touch anything anymore, reading people's trash talk about the exhibit was great. Most of them are positive, but I liked the negative ones. They'd be like, oh, your exhibit's garbage. Like one guy wrote, he goes, I think it was Razor Ramon. He's like, where's Razor Ramon? So they would argue about the people that I didn't put into the exhibit. So watching people experience an exhibit that, is very colorful. It's very loud. You can hear the trash talk when you're walking through the entire exhibit. You can hear the signature moves, and watching our patrons react to that has been a lot of fun. So those are my two big takeaways from the exhibit.
Yeah, I think what's great about wrestling in general and just the exhibit is just this generational connection that you could build. Your grandparents can come, your father, your mother, and then yourself, who's a current fan, and you can learn about things. I mean, you see like the robe of Harley Race, and then Rocky Johnson, but then you also see Stone Cold and John Cena. So it's really great, very cool to see the evolution of the business, like you said, from all the way back to Civil War times, 1800s. To the advent of television. So many different ways of thing. And then especially with now, you can definitely build on an extension of that down the line, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, for folks that are interested, Dr. Massey, if you want to just talk about where people can find out about the exhibit and just ways to connect with you guys, the museum in general, and maybe if you have an idea of what's coming up for you guys.
Yeah, well, we'd love to have you down. We are open for business. We've been open for a long time now. We have timed tickets, so you can schedule a time in advance, and we're doing that so the gallery doesn't get too crowded. We obviously want all of our patrons to be comfortable. As you mentioned, and I completely forgot, I'm glad you brought it up, is we have Rocky the Soul Man Johnson's robe. So we have some other cool artifacts that you should really come and check out besides the belt and Brutus's shears. Come down to the History Center. We're open for business. As you said, the exhibit's going to run into early January. After that, we're doing something very different. We're going to have a natural history exhibit. So for those of you that are interested in ancient history, that's what we'll be doing. And then after that, we're going to be having an exhibit on Cuban immigration to and from the state of Florida. So as you kind of pointed out, that's one thing we do here at the History Center. We have a lot of different
Eclectic.
Yeah, it's a very eclectic mix in our temporary space. But the last thing I'll say is our most recent permanent installation is an exhibit called Treasure Seekers that focuses on conquistadors, pirates, and other people in Tampa's and Florida's nautical path. So it's an exhibit that we're really proud of. So if you want to come on down and check out the wrestling exhibit, we also recommend that you check out our Treasure Seekers exhibit.
Yeah, very well done, including the maps area, which I thought was very cool because you see people's ideas and how technology has come when it comes to the accuracy of maps and topography and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.